Yo guys, what's up? After Vietnam and Afghanistan, it's time to dive into the very last incident of the Cold War, the Gulf War in Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. After Iraq had annexed Kuwait between August 2nd and August 4th, 1990, Iraq was led by dictator Saddam Hussein and his powerful Ba'ath regime, very notorious. Saddam had risen to power in July 1979 after a coup and already started a war with Iran in 1980, backed by USA. Saddam ruled with an iron fist against all those who opposed his will. He built roads, schools and hospitals for the Iraqi people, while he lived in absolute luxury and asked only one thing in return: never to raise a hand against his family. Saddam had two sons, one of them named Uday, who had inherited his father's DNA and was notorious for torturing and eliminating opponents. Uday was an animal, even worse than Hitler, and was mentally unstable because of drug abuse and a very expensive lifestyle. He had such a serious temper and was well known as a gunslinger, a loose cannon, much to the displeasure of Saddam. Uday was ultimately shot and killed by US forces at the start of the 21st century. The Gulf War only lasted for half a year for Iraq, until the end of February 1991, after the legendary 5-week Operation Desert Storm had begun on January 17, 1991. Troops from USA built up, Saudi Arabia was defended, and USA had 35 nations to back up the coalition forces. In 1 month's work, Iraqi soldiers had been driven out of Kuwait, and the monarchy was restored in a region with a destroyed infrastructure. Because many nations in the Arab region had been part of the coalition against the Iraqi expansion into the oil-rich region of Kuwait, the birth of jihad against the Soviets in Pakistan expanded to an asocial, anti-American attitude in Iraq. Iran was not involved in the coalition, nor was Turkey, China, or the Soviet Union. Right at the start of the Iraqi annexation in August 1990, immediate economic sanctions were taken against Saddam Hussein and were not lifted until his capture in 2003. USA deployed its military forces in Saudi Arabia and encouraged all other nations to deploy troops of their own, with George H.W. Bush as US President. Of course, the future oil transactions and Arab investing in security were a major reason for USA to go into battle right after the horrors witnessed by their partners, the Pakistani Mujahideen. But Kuwait and Saudi Arabia paid $32 billion of the $60 billion cost. CNN was given a patriotic role as the first live new broadcast station, bringing action directly from the front line. Army popularity grew again in the USA. On January 17, 1991, Operation Desert Storm kicked off with aerial and naval bombardments, and this tactic was repeated for 5 weeks. It wasn't until February 24th that a ground offensive was launched to expel the remaining Iraqi troops, who were not allowed to desert. Kuwait was liberated and a small advance into Iraq was made, but 100 hours after the ground offensive, a ceasefire was reached. The most important weapon for the Iraqis were Scud missiles against targets in Saudi Arabia and Israel. The inventor of the Scuds were the Soviets, who had assisted Iraq from September 22, 1980 until August 20, 1988 during the Iran-Iraq War. Also in this war there was an invasion of Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and Iran received support from China, Syria, North Korea and Israel. USA did not want to cooperate with Ayatollah Khomeini and assisted Iraq alongside France, UK and Saudi Arabia. Until June 1982, Iraq had been winning, but after that Iran had the upper hand for 6 years. Conditions of this war could be compared to the trenches in World War I, but because Iraq had increased its use of weapons of mass destruction against Iranian citizens, USA was put under immense pressure by Iran and arranged a ceasefire. The Iraqi invasion into Kuwait in 1990 was an effort to recoup following damage caused by the war in the 80s. 500,000 Iraqi and Iranian soldiers died during the Iran-Iraq War. The Gulf War killed an additional 3,664 Iraqi civilians. 650,000 troops had fought for Iraq. A total of 956,600 coalition forces fought, amongst them 700,000 Americans. After all this intel, it's not such a mystery why Iraq was targeted after Afghanistan, following the terrorist attack in New York in 2001. Even though this time, Iraq really had nothing to do with it. See you on the next one, guys. Peace.